It's the final day of the Superbet Rapid and Blitz event in Warsaw, and after a very slow start, Magnus Carlsen has fought its way back to the top, and I'm gonna show you an amazing game he played, a trademark Magnus Carlsen game. What does that mean? Completely outplaying your opponent, not giving the Super Grandmaster any chance. Let me show you how he did it. His opponent, Radoslaw Wojtaszek, playing with the black pieces, Magnus Carlsen with white, opening the game with the move 1c4. We have the English opening, c4, knight f6, knight c3, e5, knight f3, knight c6, classical variation. The four knights have been developed, and this is also what we have seen in the World Championship match between Ding and Nepo. Ding played here the move e4. It was a very interesting, sharp game. Magnus Carlsen goes for the other pawn move, d4, opening the center. After e takes d4, knight takes d4, we get a different type of game compared to many other English openings, in which usually the pawn stays on e5. But now white has ideas of, for instance, after bishop b4 to fianchetto, it's light squared bishop, and later on maybe the other bishop can be developed to g5. Black castled, bishop g2, and now interesting moment, because a few months ago Magnus Carlsen played this position against Hikaru Nakamura, and Hikaru played here the move rook e8, which is a very solid move, not revealing its plans yet. But after castling h6, stopping the move bishop g5, white still got a chance here to put its knight on d5, and I believe this is just a bit better for white, a little bit more space in the center, active pieces. Still interesting game, a lot of things can happen. But what I want to show you is that black has this big moment where he actually got to decide whether to take on c3 or not, doubling the pawns on the c file. That's a big question, and I think in general you should try to play like that. After bishop takes c3, b takes c3, these pawns are isolated and potentially weak, they can be targeted. On the other hand, white has open files, open diagonals, the bishops are quite nice in such positions, maybe the rook can even come to b1 at some point. It's still a kind of double-edged position, and I think maybe it's objectively not an advantage. There's definitely a lot to play for. Wojtaszek goes differently. He plays the move knight e5, attacking the pawn on c4, but Magnus goes queen b3, protecting the pawn and at the same time hitting the bishop on b4. The bishop goes back to c5, attacking the knight on d4, but now the knight is happy to come back to c2. White's strategy here is try to keep as many pieces on the board as possible, so that basically you have a small space advantage. You can get your bishop to g5, you can castle, knight e3, maybe a rook on d1. It's not that simple for black to formulate a good plan. Rook e8 is a possibility once again, but in the game they follow the move d6, and that's an interesting move. But the drawback of it is that now white can play the move knight a4, hitting the bishop and ensuring that white is going to get the pair of bishops. Bishop went back to b6, knight takes b6, a takes b6, and I think white is very happy with the outcome of the opening. And before anything else, white played here the move queen c3, so that if black is ever going to play bishop e6, hitting the pawn on c4, white is able to meet that move with the move b3, strengthening that pawn chain. Rook e8 played, and now white castled, and I think white, as I said, is very happy with the outcome of the opening. It was interesting to see that in a recent game between strong grandmasters Artemiev and Lazovic, black played here the move d5, which is sort of counterintuitive decision of opening the position. Usually that favors the side with the bishops, but after c takes d5, knight takes d5, queen d4, white is happy to exchange queens and claim a small but very pleasant advantage thanks to the pressure exerted by these bishops. Wojtaszek goes for a different plan. Played here the move bishop e6. What's happening here? Black is allowing white to capture the pawn on b7. But Magnus didn't do that, but he could have taken the pawn, attacking the rook at the same time. Now after rook a7, for instance, you can go back with the bishop to g2, and I think that Magnus thought, okay, then the pawn on c4 can be taken. But if you play bishop takes c4, white is going to play the move f4. And now the knight is hanging. If the knight goes away, the bishop is hanging. So white is going to win material in that case. Also in case of knight takes c4, there is the move knight to d4, threatening to take the bishop, eliminating the defender of the knight, so that after that white is able to take the knight. And secondly, also knight c6 is a big threat. If you play knight e5, trying to solve both problems, the knight is covering the c6 square, white is going to play f4, and the knight got a move, and after that there's knight c6, forking the queen and rook. Missed opportunity, so imprecise play, but that's what happens in Blitz. After bishop e6, Magnus played a very typical Blitz move. He didn't want to calculate all these lines. He thought, just solidify my position. That's absolutely fine. There's absolutely no counterplay. Black went for the move queen c8 with the idea to go bishop h3 and force the exchange of white's best piece, the bishop, on g2. But white goes bishop g5. No time for bishop h3, as that would enable white to take on f6 and ruining black's pawn formation. And what should black do about it? The knight, in fact, doesn't have that many great squares to go to. If it goes back to d7, white is going to play f4 once again, hitting the knight on e5. If the knight goes away, it's f5 and the bishop is trapped. Okay, objectively, black can still try to defend here by playing f6, counter-attacking the bishop on g5, but that's something you don't want to allow. You're opening the position, your king side is getting more vulnerable, and even the knight could come in with threats of taking on e6. For instance, knight takes e5, knight takes e6, rook takes e6, and now bang, bishop d5, you're winning the exchange. Just an example of what could go wrong for black. So very understandable, black plays the queen on c8, looking for a way to become active, but the knight on f6 is in trouble, and therefore black decided to drop back with the other knight. But look, black's position is just really passive, and white has now simple plans of even playing e4, maybe f4 later on, grab more space, get the rook involved. Okay, you got to be careful with your pawn on a2, maybe just make sure the pawn cannot be taken, but overwhelming space advantage plus bishop pair and no weaknesses at all. This is a dream position, especially in a Blitz game. Magnus didn't play e4, played knight d4 first, which is also fine, but now after the move h6, he decided to drop back with the bishop to e3. Understandable, but I think it would have just been nicer had the pawn already been on e4. On the other side, the bishop on g2 has still an open diagonal, so has some pros and cons obviously. But here, black goes for the move bishop g4. And there's some indirect pressure against the pawn on e2. It's still defended, but maybe the knight can be attacked at some point. Anyway, white played f3. And now after bishop h5, white played rook fe1. No rush here at all. Black played bishop g6. The bishop is badly placed. Now it's a bit better, but still after bishop f2, knight c5, white goes e4. And white still gets its dream pawn formation in the center, space advantage and big support from the other pieces. The rook is excellently placed on e1. The bishops are also fantastically placed, and we will see that these bishops, they're going to play a key role later on. Knight fd7 played. Black is looking for ways to maneuver with its knights. So after knight fd7, white played a4. Very good move, so that after knight e5, you can safely play here the move rook ad1 without caring about that pawn on a2. That's of course something you don't want to give the opportunity to black to take that pawn on a2. Black goes knight c6. Typical strategy once again. You're playing with a lack of space, you would like to exchange pieces, and Magnus Carlsen of course is not going to cooperate, keeps the knight on the board with knight b5. And this is a nice move. The knight is excellently placed on b5. Especially because black no longer has a pawn on a7 to kick the knight away, which means that if the knight can stay there for a long time, the pawn on c7 is really weak. So therefore, you understand that black tried here to trade off the knights, and once again, white is not going to cooperate. So he drops back with the knight to d4, knight c6, and now, okay, knight goes back to c2. No rush, keeping pieces on the board, that's a good strategy. Knight a5. So look, the knights are now attacking this pawn on b3. But is b4 possible with a double attack on these two knights? No, there is knight takes a4 with a counter attack on the queen. And later on the pawn on c4 will become weak. There are no tactics here. This is something you should not allow. But I like very much Magnus's general approach. It's what he has been showing throughout his career on so many occasions. Just be patient. He doesn't want to calculate. Just play rook b1. Okay, it's clear that the rook is better placed on d1. But if b3 is well defended, what are the black knights doing on a5 and c5? And of course, the opportunity to take on b3 is not a serious chance here for black. This position with two minor pieces versus a rook clearly favors white, and white still has ideas of expanding in the center, opening up the position for its bishops. So black also waited patiently here with the move queen d7, but now the knight is coming back into play. This time from c2 to e3 with the idea to jump into d5. Knight c6, back, knight d5. Look, also d5 is a very nice square. It can never be kicked away by a black pawn. There's no pawn on the e-file. And if ever c6 is going to be played, then the pawn on b6 can just be taken. So there are a lot of practical issues, and that explains why black is going to try to eliminate that knight with knight e7. But white keeps the knight on the board, jumps to f4. Maybe ideas to take the bishop, maybe not. After bishop h7, something like bishop h3 would actually have been a very good move, exerting more pressure on the queen. But Magnus just keeps it simple, plays rook bd1, very nice move. The rook is better off in the center with potential pressure against the queen. Black went back with the knight to c6. Probably with the idea that if you're careless, white could probably consider playing e5 here, breaking through in the center, putting pressure against the pawn on d6. That's why the knight comes back to c6 to cover the square, and white goes once again knight d5. Now you understand, if knight e7 is played, white's idea would have been to play e5. I'm 100% sure this was in Magnus' mind. You're trying to open up the position. After knight takes d5, rook takes d5, White's next move is going to be e takes d6, forcing black to recapture with a pawn, and then black ends up with very weak pawns, double pawns on the b-file, isolated pawn on d6, risk-free advantage, maybe even a winning one for white. So therefore the move rook a8 was played, and now we look at this position. We see that white has almost optimized its pieces. There's not much else you can do. You cannot really push f4 because then the pawn on e4 will be taken a couple of times as it's under threat by 3 of black's pieces. So don't play that move f4. But Magnus came up with a brilliant idea here as he played the move a5. It's a kind of move a lot of people would not have even considered. But what is the idea behind this pawn sacrifice? First of all, if you do take with a knight, there is the move b4, and this time the two knights are hanging, white is going to win material. That is not possible. If black would play any other random move, you're going to take on b6. So let's say if you go knight e7, you take on b6, knight takes d5, attacking the queen, rook takes d5, c takes b6. This is the sort of position I just talked already about. Look at these pawns, they are so weak. And now white can even play here the move b4, putting more pressure on the knight. The knight got to go away, and the pawn on b6 is in deep trouble. But the big question, of course, is what is white's idea if black just captures with its b-pawn? Pause the video if you want to calculate a little bit here for yourself. White has a winning tactical shot. Da-da-da-da-dum. It's white to play, and Magnus found a move bishop takes c5. This was the main idea of deflecting the pawn on b6, that you take the knight now on c5, d takes c5, only move, and now you see why the rook is better placed on the d-file, opposing the queen. It's knight f6 check, discover check, you're winning the queen, gf6, rook takes d7, rook takes, queen takes f6, absolutely game over. White has a queen versus a rook and a knight, but look at black's king, it's just absolutely weak. The game continued for a few more moves. Rook d6 was played, attacking the queen, queen goes back, keeping an eye on this weak pawn. Black went for the move knight to d4. And now white continued with f4. So the idea is just to play e5 next to hit the rook. After knight c2, hitting the rook on e1, white just ignored the idea. Continued here with e5. Very nice move. If you do take on e1, there's e takes d6. And if you take on g2, there's even this move, d7. And you're getting another queen, not minding that black takes on h4, there's d takes e8. And if you insert the move rook e1 instead, there's king takes g2. It's all game over. Rook d2 played. And now it may look as if this is still a little tricky with the rook on the second rank. Your rook is hanging, but Magnus finds the very cool move rook e2 with the point that you're trying to trade off black's strongest piece. Rook takes e2, queen g4 with a double attack. You're regaining the material, and very soon these pawns, they will be pushed. They come forward. Absolutely game over. Wojtaszek still tried here to move rook to d1, but there is king f2, and after knight to d4, hitting the rook on e2, the rook just goes away. Rook c1, queen takes h6. You're winning the pawn. I should actually mention that there was not a convenient way of protecting the pawn on h6, because white was also threatening queen g4 with a double attack on the rook and king. Therefore, rook had to move, but then you take the pawn, and after knight e6, the g pawn also comes forward, rook d8, and there's no need to play it slowly any longer. You bring up your f pawn, attacking the knight, but there are also ideas just to go f6, queen g7, or even if you just go knight d4, also the rook is hanging. So there are so many problems here. There's nothing you can do. Finally, Wojtaszek resigned, and I thought this was a game I really wanted to show you. I believe this was a very typical trademark Magnus Carlsen Blitz victory. Why? He almost didn't calculate anything. He was just keeping it as simple as possible, playing for positional advantages, trying to use his bishop, its space advantage. There was only just one little tactic he was calculating, was the moment where he sacrificed the pawn a5. Of course, he calculated this very briefly, but this was peanuts for him. I hope you enjoyed this game. Just make sure, if you would like to see more of these kind of fascinating games by Magnus Carlsen or many other leading players, instructive, educational content, make sure to subscribe to the channel and help it grow. Thanks for watching. See you soon.